Summer. Finally free from pandemic lockdowns, Americans head to holiday spots like South Carolina's Myrtle Beach. The last thing you'd reckon they'd worry about here now is ramping up executions.
It's a little short.
But then, if you think you understand the death penalty in America, try speaking to those here involved in a head-turning change to the system.
It's going to be eventually something that sort of dies a natural death.
Death penalty opponents will tell you the practice of executions is on the decline in the United States and soon enough will be gone.
The end of the death penalty in America is on the horizon.
Not here. Here in South Carolina, at their death row, they're expanding. They're building a firing squad. Why?
It's really...
It's going to take some effort.
Well, some of the most influential voices in death row decisions here sat down with 7 News to unravel it. Each also told us where they now stand on the death penalty, for or against. Some you just won't pick.
Important step. We've been thwarted essentially by a private company's decision not to sell us the drugs used for lethal injection. We've been unable to carry out those sentences for 10 years. So it's been kind of a long-term problem that we've finally gotten resolved.
He's a Myrtle Beach-based senator who just helped pass a law that makes the electric chair South Carolina's preferred means of execution, and a firing squad the backup.
A better method, a more certain method, and even a more humane method than the electric chair. In my view, the firing squad is, I think, may become the method of choice as we go forward.
But Greg Hembry has a more intense link to death row. He sent 7 killers there as a lead prosecutor, confronted them in the dock with the evidence, led the cause for the victims' families, then watched death row stall a decade without the drugs to deliver on a single sentence.
That's frustrating. That's a failure of our system.
If we're going to have the death penalty in our state, which we do, then carry it out.
Around Columbia's State House, Laura Hudson is a force of nature, guarding against those who want the death penalty gone.
In South Carolina, I don't think that'll happen anytime soon.
The 77-year-old advocates for victims of crime. She helped muster the votes
This is the House of Representatives.
to bring back electrocution and the firing squad.
But we cannot continue to coddle people. We have to have personal responsibility.
And here is where they settled it. The firing squad bill, backed not only by South Carolina's deep conservatives, but by some Democrats as well. In the end, they carried it by a vote of almost 2-1. Then went within 2 days of electrocuting killer Brad Sigmon. Another murderer, Freddie Owens, set for the chair a week later. South Carolina's Supreme Court intervened, not ruling out the executions, rather ordering the state assemble its new firing squad first, so Sigmon and Owens get to choose. Is the electric chair inhumane?
No, it's quick. It's quicker.
John Osmint was South Carolina's prisons boss back when the state had no problem getting lethal drugs, though he says some chose the chair.
I'd go in and hug them and tell them, I may or may not see you before the execution. I was fortunate, Tim. I had all except maybe one of the men that we executed while I was at corrections were volunteers. They were truly sorry for what they'd done. They volunteered for execution because they wanted to bring closure to the victims and to their families, and they knew they deserved it.
Now he helps prison lifers win parole, reckons the state was warned about a shortage of death drugs years ago.
I know it's 10 years.
Because
I told them.
And says the politicians are playing politics.
Stop playing chest-thumping games with this just so you can tell your constituents that you voted for the firing squad.
I simply want justice.
It's been 27 years since Samantha Leitner found her mum murdered. Almost a quarter of a century since the killer was sentenced. The day before we spoke with Samantha, he lodged another appeal.
It's very exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting to think, well, here we go again. He was given death. He deserves death. I'd like to see him dead.
One man on South Carolina's death row has been there since 1983.
On that particular case, I think most of the crime victims' family are deceased. The wife, the mother, the dad of someone who is murdered has gone to their grave before they saw justice. That is not right.
That's like my worst fear, is that I won't make it to see justice served.
In northern South Carolina these days, retired Judge Gary Clary is more concerned with a putter than a gavel. But the judge who presided over 10 death penalty cases, his name's still on the state's death row roster opposite the killers he sent there, is keenly interested in the changes.
I never thought that the jury ever made the wrong decision.
But the politicians, he says, have made a wrong decision now.
Electrocution's a very barbaric way of executing someone. An entire new round of litigation appeals is going to ensue and keep these cases tied up for a number of years.
The judge, the daughter, the advocate, the prison boss, the prosecutor. How do they now feel about the death penalty? Before we check, one last case.
The electrode then is placed on top of the inmate's head. It's an actual cap.
The warden who ran this electric chair in Florida in the 90s, a quarter of a century's water under the bridge. Today, Ron McAndrew has a picture of the chair he knew as Old Sparky on his wall at home.
I want it there. I want to see it all the time.
Therapy, the 82-year-old says, to deal with the faces of those who died in it.
Have come to visit me many times in years past. Come sit on the edge of my bed at night. I've actually moved over to make room for them.
One, Pedro Medina, was in Old Sparky as it malfunctioned. The flame almost caught you.
Yes. Flame almost caught me in the face. And for the next 3 minutes, we burned Pedro Medina to death. We literally burned that poor man to death.
Did that change Ron McAndrew's view of the death penalty? After a whiskey problem,
And I'd have 8 or 10 drinks before dinner.
and more than a decade's counselling, yes.
It's absolutely wrong.
He's now a fierce abolitionist. Advocate Laura Hudson, firmly for.
It's a fulfillment of justice.
The judge who sent those killers to death row. You're actually an opponent of the death penalty.
I am. All the folks that are on death row are in essence serving life sentences. And in my view, that's the way it should be.
And the daughter who found her mum murdered? She's long been portrayed as pro-death penalty. Maybe, though, if she could throw away the killer's key. But if life were life...
We're life to the end of your natural life. I could accept that. Close the book and walk away.
The prosecutor who sent them to death row says he's watched a couple of the executions he helped clinch.
They're terribly sad and just kind of empty.
You feel that sadness, you sense that humanity, but you remain a supporter of the death penalty.
Oh yeah, I do.
And the prison's boss, who now helps other prisoners win parole, he too still backs the death penalty, even though he tells us death row reforms many on it before it takes them.
It sadly does. Death row does that to a man. Death row wins in the end. It always wins in the end.